And we just had the previous seminar on safety in engineering chemical industries, which was held in March 2021. So I think we are Western Regional Offices Centers is doing the sequence. I think they'll come back again July, August, the other aspects of the risk, hazards, safety. I think I would request all the participants to stay online and link to the CI for future seminars. I also welcome all eminent speakers and panelists who will be sharing their knowledge and experiences on the subject matter. I'm happy that my colleagues have lined up very seasoned and experienced speakers who can address all aspects of the subject, from training on risk and workplace hazard, engineering risk, risk management of contracts, legal aspects to the contracts, insurance and reinsurance of human and material resources, project insurances, codes and standards for hazards and risks, all those things to be addressed. Before that also, they could be also working on those the contracts or the insurances and legal aspect during the period of the construction or consulting, and also post-construction implementation and operational stage. So those are things should be covered. Let me just give a little brief of what is CAI. CAI stands for the Consulting Engineers Association of India, which is the apex body of consulting engineers in India. It represents the Indian engineering consulting professional at the International Federation of Consulting Engineers, which is called as FIDIC, F-I-D-I-C. CI is the voice of the consultants and consulting engineering companies of India. CI has over 60 years of accumulated knowledge and experiences behind it. So it's a 60 years organization which is going forward. I believe hazards and risks are an extremely important aspects of our business practices, but they are very often not given importance in our field. See how the pandemic caught us completely world on ours. I'm aware that most of the large consulting and contracting companies have a specialist team or process to go through risk aspects right from the stage of bidding, which we call go or no go stage, a project to the bidding, right, in a project implementation as well, and even operation and maintenance. So that team, which is a specialist team, also tasked with the responsibility to maintain the risk register for projects which is going on. And that's the part of our normally in a team of, in the division called health, safety, environment, quality, and security is another aspect. And there are different levels of risk, including the process from the top leadership. And typically these large companies, they go through this risk process approval before and during the process, and they do monitor also before getting into the projects. Therefore, my submission is that, and it's most desirable, that small and large medium-sized companies should include risk analysis aspects and hazards into their HSEQ and security manual, health, safety, environment, quality, and security manual, which is very essential at this stage of consulting and during this pandemic as well. I like to give my small two experiences. One as a leadership team, which takes all the risk assessment before going during the construction, even post-construction. How hazard risk analysis being taken at the level, in the project level. So it relates to a project which is a 330 megawatt, which is called Kishanganj hydroelectric project, very extreme end of the northwest of India, which is in Kashmir. It's a river called Kishanganj, which is a tributary of Jhelum. And this project is why unique is you have to work under the kind of a guidelines of IWT, Indus Water Treaty. It's an extreme weather condition, so you have a window of operation maybe 4 to 6 months. Specifically, I can tell you, when you even approach the project, which is so northwest of India, when you go during the summer period, in the working period, you have to be very careful. You have to cross, there is a small rivulet called Gorechu Nala. If you don't cross before 9 o'clock, which is dry that time, and you can't really cross the river, there is no bridge. So similarly, when you come back, you have to come back after 4:35 because the snow melts and there is a huge flow. So therefore, these are certain things when you go and approach the project, you need to look at. You also look at is a 24-kilometer tunnels in the very, what you call difficult terrains or Himalayan geology. So you have a number of contractors, consultant, owners. So you work in a very tripartite kind of organization, taking into account all your consultant man, machines and everything. So this is an interesting where I work as actually the last person to approve, not approve on the risk and hazardous aspect of the project. This is one. The second project is which I worked as a contract manager during 94-95. This is a project called South Basin Hazira Trunk Pipeline. So that is coming from Bombay High to Hazira, 160 kilometers of long. You have contractors, number of contractors. You have Hyundai, you have L&T, you have consultant process engineer like Fisher Rosemount, you have McDermott, you have EIL, you have ONGC. Here is a company which does the pre-engineering, post-engineering pipeline. So you work with a number of people, and therefore the safety, the risk, the hazard aspect, window of operation, you need to really understand. So this is the two aspects I'm mentioning where you have all what you see as we're going to discuss today is going to be covered. Very recently, I'm sure that most of you have read it, that there is an article research by some IITs, I don't know whether it's Delhi IIT, Mumbai IIT. They mapped actually based on the worst generation of cities. They found cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, Calcutta, they top number 1 to 5 on the vulnerability index on the West generation. That means these are cities, when you do a project on urban upgradation or urban management project, you got to really take into account your hazards and safety aspects or risk aspect when you do that. So these are index which will come. I think I'm sure our friends have a modeling, catastrophic modeling or disaster related modeling, which will guide actually consulting and contracting companies to really carry on their business. So these are two aspects of the contracting and the risk and hazardous aspect. So I'm confident that the presentation and deliberation today with our experienced team or the speakers will address key issues and the challenges which we perceive by our fraternity, including liabilities arising out of hazards and risks. With this, I thank you all and welcome again. Thank you all. Harsha, back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Pradhan, President of CIA, for this address and reminding us of the simple things that can also be hazards, like the crossing of a stream and the fact that communication may be cut off, your physical communication to the location may be cut off. These are things, that is the importance of risk. So every activity might have a risk associated with it. And this is the importance. And also talking about a risk log, which should be maintained on every major project site. These are all fallouts of this discussion that will be happening through these next few hours. On that note, I would like to call on the doyen of our risk and safety profession, that is Dr. N. Krishnamurthy, who's addressing us from Singapore. He will be speaking on hazards and risks and what to do about them. Dr. Krishnamurthy is the founder director for the Center for Workplace Safety and Health in Mysuru, in the old college at which he studied, NIE in Mysore. He's a safety consultant and trainer, most of the time in Singapore and then part of the time in India, involved with the CI recently as a friend of the CI with more than, I would say, across in my ideas, my grandfather, my father and me, 3 generations he knows, and we are family friends of that standing and that age. I welcome Dr. Krishnamurthy on his address, please. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Subbarao. I'm very happy to be part of this major effort to bring some awareness of safety to your audience. Today, I'll be speaking on what do we do about this, hazards and risks. Are you all able to hear me and see my slides?
Perfect, sir.
Okay. Now, I start by thanking the Consulting Engineering Associations of India for inviting me to make this presentation and accepting my center as a supporting organization. I'm proud to be on the same platform of supporting organizations as Tully & Co. and Safe India. Just one slide on my center. Full details can be obtained by simply typing siwosh.com. I'll show you the website, not show you, but indicate the website. It was inaugurated by Padma Vibhushan N.R. Narayan Murthy, who happened to be a student of mine, on 6th of December 2019. Our motto is, we are here to keep you safe or make you safer at your workplace and elsewhere too. And we have a very ambitious mission, but I'll summarize it by saying we plan to raise the awareness of, did you lose my slide?
It's okay, sir. Go ahead.
Okay.
Okay.
Awareness of safety and by means of person courses, webinars, and training sessions on various aspects of safety and health. So you can note this website and get all the information from that on the course I am starting on 26th and many free courses, okay? Now I start by talking about risk management is certainly known to and practiced in most advanced countries and even in India by a number of major organizations. But the fact remains that by and large, it is not known to, or even when known, not effectively practiced by most industrial enterprises in India. As the president of the association brought out, it's very essential in almost all levels of industry. It's imperative that organizations in India adopt risk management as a tool, not only to reduce accidents, but also to boost productivity. I'm happy to be sharing that our government is doing something about this already. I feel privileged to have been invited to be part of the expert committee on occupational safety and health in Factories Act. And along with 14 other experts, we are doing something about bringing in as a mandatory and a guidance level, 2 levels of risk management. More on that later. My coverage will be what hazard is, what risk is, why we should do risk management, and a brief overview of how. This is a 40-hour course I teach at universities, a 12-hour course I give to organizations, but today in the 26 minutes I have left, I'll be happy to cover basically what we are talking about. First of all, what is a hazard? Many people confuse hazard with actual danger, but hazard is potential danger. For instance, I'll be showing you a ladder and a stream which is doing nothing to us until we do something to it. We don't have to worry about every hazard because we have to face some of them to go through life, but only about those to which we'll be exposed and which will harm us beyond a certain limit. But it is most important that we identify every hazard that our professional activities in the workplace face, because a hazard missed may become a risk and we will not be ready for it, resulting in lots of problems. Risk is, on the other hand, an actual danger, a hazard which is activated, to which we are exposed and which is realized. So, example, climbing the ladder is a risk, crossing the stream is a risk. Risk we have to be concerned about, but we may not have to worry about it, but we have to concern and plan to manage it, because if we do not, it can cause human harm, property damage, and other losses. We must assess the risk, manage the risk to reduce the accidents and their consequential harm and losses. So I talked about a ladder. This is doing nothing. It's not harming anybody. And then when someone wants to climb on it, then suddenly a hazard becomes risk. It may be manageable very easily. We do that. Similarly, a stream is just there. But when somebody wants to cross it, then there are questions of width and depth and what happens on the other bank. Rain, such a simple thing which we take for granted, which is good for the fields and water supply, doesn't harm people unless they get into it and expose themselves. So you understand the difference between hazard and risk. So as an example, taking rain, hazard is the potential danger, which is rain, but risk is when a woman or a man or anybody with a document in hand particularly walks in the rain. What are the consequences? Consequences, most of us don't bother, but if the woman gets a flu, she may be hospitalized. The document gets damaged, it may involve a lot of losses. So safety means reduce the risk or eliminate the risk and protect everybody involved and the assets involved from danger. So one simple way for individually protecting the persons would be to hold an umbrella and in addition, wear a plastic raincoat. This is a very simple example. Now, what is risk assessment? It's not a big deal. It's actually very simple at one level and very complicated at another level. So it is a whole range of experiences. Risk management is not new to us. It is built into our amygdala inside our mind from birth. So what we do instinctively, spontaneously, most of the time, adapting our actions to address situations that may pose a danger to us or those who are with us. analyzing and avoiding or controlling the risk. So if you think about it, we are already risk managers. That is why when we take an umbrella, if it looks like railing, taking a simple example, whether we realize it or not, our mind, both conscious and subconscious, will analyze the possible consequences of our getting into a potentially dangerous situation and instinctively, subconsciously decide that we should take preventive measures. Even children do that, animals do that. Then what's the problem? Modern man, modern woman included, in urban life has forced most of us to do multitasking and face survival problems. So most of us have overcome, without wanting to, the natural instinct of self-preservation and to break natural and man-made laws designed for our protection, and instead take risks as the lesser of the two evils for some short-term benefit. That is the problem. That is why we need awareness of what's going on around us today in this changed world. But when you come to formal risk management, it's an art and a science. It's not a mere mathematical formula. It needs a lot of thinking. It also needs a lot of heart, which is adopted by most advanced countries, primarily for most financial investments, but increasingly for industrial and other professional activities in engineering, medicine, etc. Now, I'm going to take road accidents for 2 or 3 reasons. One, road accidents claim the maximum injuries and the maximum number of deaths in India. And please don't think I am overstating the case, but I'll give you some essential things and also do a case study which will apply risk management to this situation. Riding without a helmet has become so normal that few remember the possible dangers, but it remains a fact that helmetless riders and two-wheelers are the maximum number of fatalities and injuries in India. And I won't go through the numbers, but you can see out of so many crores of vehicles on the road, nearly 30 crores, two-wheelers are nearly 23 crores, 77% of them. And road accidents, again, two-wheelers are about 40% of them. I won't repeat the numbers, but it has been proved that not wearing a helmet a couple of years before this is claimed 37,000 lives. Not one can be replaced. So two-wheelers, again, as the pie chart shows, take claims 38%, and overspeeding out of that is about 56%. Dangerous or careless driving is 28%. Now you may say this is individual problems. So let us see what we do about them. What have we done about them? One example I will show you, because many may not realize what exactly happens when some two-wheeler collapses and people fly off. So this gentleman and his lady companion are riding. I highlighted in red the helmet which should be on the head, but which happily rests on top of the gas tank because it probably makes him look prettier and handsome. For some reason, they collapse. The lady has a helmet. These two guys just run away or drive away. The helmet from the gas tank top has fallen here. The point is he's driving at 50 kilometers an hour. The head hits the pavement at 50 kilometers an hour, which is like a hammer hitting the head at 50 kilometers an hour. Once the head is hit, there will at least be minimum injury to the brain, and more than that, it could be worse. And people who are lucky to have a body bag available will be transported to the mortuary. I'm not exaggerating, but I want to use this as a risk management case study. So I'm a risk manager. Now I have to find the causes of the mishap. It can be from the driver, it can be from the vehicle, it can be from road conditions. Driver, people may wonder why I have not included the helmet. The helmet does not cause the accident. Overspeeding, rash driving, too many riders cause the accident. Mechanical fault, bad tires, bad brakes can cause the accident. Bad alignment, poor lighting, road conditions may cause the accident. So people know these dangers, and people try to eliminate 100% of the danger by assigning some percentages to various things. So speed limit bumps 20, I won't go through all of them. If you add all the pink numbers, it is 100%. So the intention of engineers and users is to avoid danger completely. But what happens? Instead of 20%, we only gain 10%. Many neglect these rules. Many do not use the rules, protective things, preventive things we are given. So an accident happens. If you add up the blue numbers, we have taken care of 60% of the accident. These are rough numbers, but 100% out of 100%, 60% due to preventive safeguards in risk management. Then after that, we still have things to do, because to avoid the injury, somebody has fallen, a helmet will prevent 85% of those injuries. So out of the 40%, 30% goes to the helmet wearing and the other insurance, hospital, and these are rough numbers. So the point is that not wearing a helmet exposes the persons to injuries, permanent disabilities, death, in spite of all the preventive safeguards and in spite of all the mitigating and reducing safeguards. There's a very nice way to present this. It is called the bow tie diagram or a butterfly diagram. Why? Because the shape of the diagram compares to a bow tie as well as a butterfly. That is why. But the point is, we start with the causes and then try to provide preventive barriers for the driver, vehicle, road, weather, and mitigating or reducing barriers for helmet, insurance, medical, and alerts. The preventing controls reduce the likelihood or chances before the accident, and the mitigating controls reduce the severity after the accident. So what happened was, we had 100%, we reduced it to 60%, and then the mishap happened. We further reduced it to 30. So we are able to at least bring it to 10. We can reduce it to 5 if we take more care. Otherwise, we will be left with 30 if we continue our present practices. Now, why do people take risk? Out of ignorance, when people think that having it below the nose controls the germs, or having it at the neck looks prettier. This one, I don't have time, but this is a VIP garlanding a statue of another dead VIP. None of them, it's a recent picture, none of them is wearing a mask, but I covered the eyes because legally I am required to cover the eyes of people who, so they will not be recognized. Negligence and carelessness, again, I won't go into details. Necessity, like somebody going to school in China, even in our mountainous regions, children have to take a lot of risks. Then this livelihood, but not many people die. They're used to climbing 20, 30 meters and coming down safely. This one, I don't have time to talk about it, but this is survival. They take risks just because otherwise they will not be able to have 1 square meal a day. Of course, hobbies, weekend jolly things they do, and then bungee jumping, which is not at all dangerous if it is done properly, and then circus and other acts where it is their livelihood and for entertainment. Then there is fear and self-destruction. Then, of course, ultimately, most of the dangers you can trace to, politely, you can call it profit, or you can become factual and call it greed, but some of it is necessary for business purposes. Okay, with that, why do we do risk management? Because for the same reason, we read the weather report, we go for a medical checkup, we stretch our hands walking in the dark so that we don't hit anything. These are automatic. Take out life insurance, set alarm for next morning when you have an important meeting, match horoscopes so we find the proper life partner. So to avoid, to check if any bad things may happen and avoid them or protect ourselves from them as well as possible. So the reasons are many. I may not read all of them. Identify the hazards, ensure workers will be protected, enable meeting all legal requirements, facilitate appropriate safety, economy, and productivity, improve personnel morale. These are intangible benefits of risk management. Mainly, it will warn you, it will predict what might happen so that you can be prepared. Forewarned is improving safety. Okay, these are the benefits. Now I'm going to take one more final proof or final confirming fact that in Singapore, in which I have stayed for 20 years and been very deeply involved in government and private efforts at risk management, I have been studying this done government research and come to the conclusion with facts that 80 to 85% of workplace accidents could have been prevented or reduced to an acceptable level simply by knowing about it before and planning it. Conduct lessons learned, conduct, implement, and requires careful assessment and on-site conducted. So I can go on and on, but believe me, this is not a luxury. It's a necessity. It has been clearly established that the majority of injuries and deaths could have been avoided if risk assessment had been done. Now to the procedure. The most important step is identify the hazards. If you don't identify them, it's like not diagnosing a disease. How can you treat it? So you must identify. Half the effort, half the thinking goes into identification. So and there are many hazards we don't recognize. For instance, the foods we eat, not that you shouldn't go to Pani Puri stuff, many of them are okay, but a survey showed that on an average, the coliform is a polite name for human feces, bacteria from the human feces are present 50 times more than the tolerable limit. But I'm not saying you shouldn't. Be careful where you eat, what you eat. The air we breathe is polluted. The water we drink, much of it is untreated. Even the mineral water is half the time suspect. Roads we walk or drive on, I've already talked about it. Pedestrian crossings. In Delhi, every second death that takes place on the road is to a pedestrian. This is a fact. I'm not exaggerating. So what we need is awareness. This awareness is what we need most. We must develop that first, because without it, we will ignore or neglect the dangers we face. So this one, what happens? He wants to do it. He's eager to do it. He's been doing it for 10 years in his northern state or southern state. But what happens if he falls? This is a very fashion statement. I am not commenting on the architect's contribution, but I request this gentleman not to invite a child, not to invite an old person, and not to invite a pregnant lady to his parties. This one many may not follow, so I'm giving a small subtitle. It's the hands of a child overhead for having dropped into an disused bore well, which could have been covered up by a half a meter square stone or something, but was not. 20 children die in boreholes in the last 2 or 3 years. And this one, I think in Mysore, I'm proud to say they have got one robot to clean and take free pictures of what is going on in our sewers. This is our own brethren and sisters who have to go into our feces. You can easily solve that. This one, it takes a policeman to beg them. So many, none of them having a helmet. So what my point is, if we cannot see the risks in these familiar scenes, then how can we in India claim our place in the world as a smart nation or as a humane nation? I leave you to think about it. Once we know the dangers, we should understand the full consequences. Let us say we have identified them. That's just the beginning. So when consequences of being ignorant or negligent, that takes a little thinking. One example, a recent Rana Plaza, not recent, 2013, and 1,134 people died for the simple reason that while the building was warning them with cracks and falling plaster, the manager owner gave a press interview where he said, these are only plastic cracks. I have a certificate from an engineer who says this is just plastic cracks. So all the workers should work. 1,134. Negligence or ignorance. After understanding the consequences, we must estimate how bad the consequences will be under different conditions. That is a second step. Some of these take some training, some background, and some calculation depending on where you want to be. But at least you must know that there are consequences. We may not be able to prevent all of them, but we must do whatever is technically, legally, this is the phrase, reasonably practicable. Whatever your assets will permit after you take reasonable profit. Then nobody says you should not make a profit, but you should, but leave some. The average in the world is 2 to 3% of your asset should go into safety. Some companies do more to eliminate the hazards. Now, the steps procedure, how do we do it? I will be able to complete it fairly nicely. It consists of 4 steps. Identify credible and pertinent hazards in a specific job or task. Assess the levels, mean estimate. Why should we assess them? I'll come to it in a minute. Combine the components and assess the level of risk, and then eliminate the risk or the hazard and mitigate or reduce the consequences by controls. You got to control everything. You got to manage. To assess, you got to understand what is acceptable, what is tolerable, and what is unacceptable. Very simple principle. We do that all the time. I get so many rupees a month. I can afford this. I can save and afford this, but I cannot afford this. So it depends on the person, it depends on the industry, it depends on the assets we have. So this is the basis of deciding how bad a risk is and what we do about them. Obviously, it's not one size fits all. It depends on industry, organization, project, task, material, applied regulations, and finally, thinking and the heart. You must have the feeling that it's not somebody else, it's our own kind, it's our own human brother or sister whom we are exposing to risk. Now, simply put, risk is made up of many factors, but the 2 most important are how often the danger will hit and how bad will it be when it hits. Now, likelihood is a guess. I won't say like astrology because a lot of statistics is there. India needs a lot of data to be able to decide what will happen in the next month or in the next year, not in politics or not necessarily just in politics or finances, but in the industry. So for instance, a death which happens once in 10 or 20 years, you cannot say I cannot manage it because it happens. So some of it is acceptable. Fracture, some of if it is tolerable, is the likelihood chances every 6 months is tolerable. Scratch or something that happens every day is unacceptable. Once in 10 years or 20 years, you have to accept. You cannot say zero risk. Once in 6 months or 1 year, we can manage. Once every day or every week is unacceptable. Similarly, severity, a scratch is nothing. You can lick on it and draw it on the wall and it's nothing. Fracture, we need to be careful for a month. We put our hand in a cast. Death is unacceptable. So there are 2 independent things. Don't confuse that something that happens frequently is very dangerous. Aircraft crashes make big news, but then they happen so rarely. Flying is the safest of all transportation. So we must estimate in 3 levels or more: low, medium, high, very low, low, medium, high, very high, whatever. It depends on the resources and needs. And then how do we combine them? They're independent, but we combine them by means of a matrix or by means of numerical methods and by means of mathematical methods. Qualitative, numerical, mathematical. Okay, low risk, don't worry about it. We cannot spend our life worrying about what will happen if bacteria affects my hand. Toilet handles have 90% coliform, but you wash it, then use a soap solution, or don't shake hands just when you come out and somebody comes out of the toilet. But we don't need extra safeguards. Monitor occasionally to ensure it remains low. High risk, don't do it. No temporary measures. Hey, be careful, I'll get the machine guard later. No, he may get his hand in it unconsciously or carelessly and he will lose a hand. So no interim measures, don't start. It was something that is high risk. Stop whatever you are doing. I'm talking about professional responsibility. Personal, if somebody knows the risk and does it, we cannot argue about it. Reduce to his karma, whatever we say. Reduce at least medium risk before starting, because medium risk you can manage. Low risk, don't worry. So what is medium risk? Whatever is not low risk and whatever is not high risk. You must manage it. Engineers are good managers. Don't worry about it, about the management part, but we will manage. How to manage in the next few slides, I will show you. Okay. For instance, let me take this simple case. This guy, he looks a little too short. He has to cross a 1 meter wide, 2 meter deep. Now, we may not think about it, but let us say he has attended my course, let us say. So he puts down on paper. What's the one that I won't worry about it at all? So if it is about 3/4 of a meter, I just will step across. I won't even think about it. It's acceptable width. That is the likelihood of falling. Then what is it that I cannot do? Oh, more than my height, I don't think I can try. I'm not an Olympic jumper. So more than 1.5 meters or something. All right. So in between 0.9 to 1.5 is the tolerable. I can manage. I can take a running leap and jump over. Depth is the severity part. A few centimeters will just wet his shoe or wet his foot, and nobody bothers about it. So less than 5 centimeters, I won't care. I cannot be worrying about it. Then more than my height, meaning I'll be sinking completely. I know swimming, but I cannot be paddling all the time. So that is unacceptable. But between 5 centimeters and 1.6, my feet may get wet, my suit may get wet, but nothing, no big danger. So now I put this into a top and likelihood, 3 columns, and then severity, depth, which is 3 rows. So there are 9 combinations. Now, again, for lack of time, I won't explain how we arrive at this, but there is a low risk at the bottom left corner, high risk at the top right corner, and in between there is medium risk. This is the absolute minimum small, medium, and large companies should do. And that is how a risk matrix is born. Now, at the other extreme, 2009, I gave a, so he should be crossing it, because he's 1 meter and 2 meter is in this column, maybe in this one, and it's too high anyway. Now, just one slide on what I presented in Baltimore, and I'll just show you because I'm running out of time. So this is a 10 by 10, and it can apply to many cases. So the last one, how do we control it? Never say it will not happen to me. Ask instead, if and when it happens to me, can I afford the consequences? Usually that solves the problem. If I can handle it, but my family cannot. There are 5 ways of solving it. Just look at it. I don't have time. And these are the examples of how those 5 ways. This is called building the units at ground and placing it there. No scaffold, no farm work. Substitute a safer thing for a more dangerous thing. Engineering control, administrative control, and personal protective equipment. With that, I think I just opened the windows for you, and then cewosh.com, CEWOSH, write to us, talk to us, and it gives enough information. Thank you, and be safe.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnamurthy. As usual, you're absolutely lucid, cogent, coherent, and you make your point such that even a common person who has no identity with the subject, like the great Faraday lectures, for the common man, Faraday lectures in the UK, all for the common man, the most complex thing being given in a simple, easy to understand manner. Thank you very much, sir, for setting the tone for the event today. Thank you very much, sir. The next speaker that we have, I would like to say what Dr. Krishnamurthy said was so clear and so clean. There is no need to summarize or state anything. It stands on itself as a beautiful piece of introduction to this session. So let us then ask Uttam Sengupta, who has been a part of CI for many years, and one of the core members of the CI, also a past chairman of the Western region and a member of the GC of the CI. He will be speaking on risk management of contracts. He was earlier a former corporate advisor, contracts and risks, global risks and global contracts for Voltas Limited. So Mr. Uttam Sengupta, can we have your talk, please, sir?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Subbarao, for this wonderful introduction. I will try my best to see what I can deliver today so that people take home at least the basics, the subject of risk and risk in project contracts, specialist in, and I am a domain expert. So, gentlemen, good morning to everybody. This is Sengupta here. I'm going to present a topic on risk management in contracts, particularly relating to project contracts and more particular in construction contracts. First of all, let me introduce the subject of risk. What is this risk all about? Gentlemen, risk is nothing but an event happening. Risk is nothing but an event happening and probability of that event taking place in a project delivery system. What is risk management? Risk management is nothing but a process being followed to identify, analyze, and evaluate that risk so that there are no surprises at the end of the project. And why it is a contract? Why the word contract? Gentlemen, today we have got lots of legal issues, arbitrations running here and there. For what? From where do this risk come from? The risk comes from the contract document which both parties sign while taking a project delivery. Am I clear? Why the word contract is? The contract is there because the risk eventuates from the project risk eventuates from the contract that is signed between the parties. And therefore, one of the most important thing in a contract is risk allocation in a contract. What decides that who will bear the risk is the allocation of risk in a contract. Gentlemen, these are the few things that I'm going to stress upon in my presentation today. So I start with the first slide. Slide 2. What is risk in a contract? Is slide number 2. Risk is a measure of inability to achieve overall project objective with defined cost, time schedule, and technical constraints that have been embedded therein. So what is the most important thing? What are the risks in a project contract? Risk is completion of time and within the cost. These are time and cost are the two essentials of a contract. If you are able to complete your contract within the time and within the cost, then you have completed the contract in the most profitable way. So what is the risk involved in, from where does this risk come from? Time and the cost in the contract. Time is what is the time? If you are not able to complete the project in time, there is a risk involved. If you are not able to complete the project within the cost, there is a risk involved. So time and cost are most important elements of risk in a project contract. And therefore, we need to understand what is this and how does this time and cost come into play. It is because of various events that take place in a contract. Like, what are the events in a contract which causes delays? The events that would cause delay is non-availability of front at a particular point of time, not doing the work in a sequence manner, not doing somebody stopping you from doing the work. The force majeure clauses coming into play. These may all delay the contract, and therefore there may be a claim for time. So time comes from contracts, and therefore time is a risk. Time and cost comes from where? Cost is that you overshot the contract, overshot the cost at the time of execution. So we need to be very careful when doing project contracts with relation to time and cost. So that is why I say risk is a measure of inability to achieve overall project objective. What is the objective of the project? The objective of the project is to complete the project in time, within the time and cost, and with the margins, with the profit margins that you have planned for the project. And there may be technical constraints that may be embedded therein while in the operations of the project. Risk is basically of two components: probability of an event happening and consequences of failing to achieve that outcome. So, as I said, what is risk? Risk is an event. What is the management of that means? Risk management would mean that you have to control, to identify those risks, to evaluate those risks, and to mitigate those risks. So that is why it is a risk. It is a probability of happening. Risk is nothing but a probability of happening. There are no standard approach of risk management, though there are some common elements of successful risk management efforts. Why there are no standard? Why do I say that there are no standard here? Because each business is separate business. Each of the business environment would be separate. So there are no one fit available for risk management. But the principles remains the same. What are the principles? Principles would be, there is an event which will happen. This is called risk. The probability of the event happening. This is what we need to understand. And what happens if the event happens? What is the degree and what is the consequence of those risks? Why manage risk? Slide 3. In fact, it is a fact of life. It is a fact of life that chance events will occur and affect the outcome of your project. Is it not correct, gentlemen, that it is a fact of life that chance events will occur and affect the outcome of your project? What are the chance events that may occur? Chance events could be a wide range of things. A wide range of things in a project, in a construction project. It may be a wide range of things in a construction project. Therefore, what I say is that Murphy laws codifies this knowledge. If anything can go wrong, it will. Of things that could go wrong, the one that causes the most damage will incur. Project risks are defined as undesirable event. The chance of this event might occur and the consequence of the possible outcomes. Risk management attempts to identify such events, minimize their impact, and provide the response of events detected. The essence of project management is risk management. So, gentlemen, what is project management? What is the essence of project management is that you do a risk management. Now, in slide 4, what I have talked about risk governance and management. What is governance of risk? Governance of risk is a need to have a process which protects shareholders' value. Gentlemen, now we are all aware that even the company law requires that that there is a statement made in the company in the balance sheet that there is a risk policy, risk governance, and risk management has been done. This is now no longer optional. It is compulsory under company's law to have a risk management and a risk statement put up by the board of directors, the chairman of the company, that the risk has been, the auditors of the company, that they have audited the accounts of the company and there is a process of risk management being followed in the company. This would give the stakeholders a good amount of confidence. So risk management is therefore not an option available today. It is a mandatory under Companies Act to have a risk management policy by the company that needs to be followed. So, gentlemen, now we come to the subject of risk management. What is risk management? Gentlemen, there are basically 3 questions to be asked while there are. Just put up the chart. This one. This one. Like this. Gentlemen, now we come to to see what is risk management. We have talked about risk. To sum up, I have said risk is nothing but an event happening. Now we come to what is risk management. Risk management process, 3 fundamental questions if you ask, that will be enough for a risk management to be in place. First of all, risk identification. What is risk identification? Whenever the first day when you get your tender on the table and you read the tender and you want to make a pricing of it, you first see what are the risks involved in those the tender conditions. What are the risks involved in those contract conditions? What might go wrong? What is a risk identification is what might go wrong. Risk analysis, what is the likelihood and probability that it will go wrong? Risk evaluation, what are the consequences and the severity? Risk management, therefore, is an independent function responsible for planning, directing, controlling impact of risk arising from operations. Generally only found as a separate unit in a larger institution. So gentlemen, now coming to summation of risk management, there are 3 steps involved. Risk identification. You identify this risk. Identification of risk is the first process of risk management. The second process is risk estimation. You estimate the risk in how do you estimate that risk? You estimate the risk that if it happens, what would be the damage caused? That is what you say. What I mean is estimation of risk. Then risk response and planning and execution. Now I come to slide 7, risk management steps. There are 4 major risk steps to develop a risk management plan. Identify all the project risks and events that could affect the project. Assess each risk in terms of probability, impact, severity, and controllability. So, gentlemen, how do so the gentlemen, how do we identify all the risks? Where do we get which is the document that we use to see the identifying of risk? It is the contract document. Contract document, we identify all the risks. Then what the next step we do is to evaluate the risk. How do we evaluate the risk? By placing a price tag on it. Then what we do is we develop a strategy and do a planning as to how we control this risk. Risk management plan should be developed during the initial project phase and not during the execution stage. It should be risk management to start during the initial project stage. So, gentlemen, now if you see, if you see the chart which we have done, why is it coming in there? So in the chart which I have shown you, for the first step would be risk identification. Analyze the project to identify the sources of risk. These would be the known risk which you will identify. There are 2 types of risk, known risk and the unknown risk. The known risk will come from the contract itself, from the contract clauses itself. The contract clauses, that what you should do is to analyze the project to identify the sources of risk. That is the known risk. Step 2, risk assessment. Assess risk in terms of severity of contract, likelihood of it occurring, and controllability. The third would be risk assessment. Develop a strategy to reduce the possible damage. Develop contingency plan. The fourth step would be risk responses. Implement risk strategy, monitor and adjust plan or new risk, change management. Slide 8, gentlemen, I have just pointed out what are the 10 steps which would be effective for a good risk management policy. A good risk management, not policy, but risk management process. I am not going into the details of the steps. You could read the steps, but these are all related to project construction project management. The most important thing that I would like to come now is what we call as allocation of risk. Gentlemen, how is this? How is risk allocated? Risk is allocated through the contract document.
Slide 16.
Yeah. If the risks are not allocated in the contract, then the arbitrator or ultimately the court would usually be charged with the task of allocation, and in doing so, they might use one of the 4 established criteria for such an allocation as discussed below. So gentlemen, as I told you in the beginning, this lecture of mine, which had risk management in contracts. So how the most important topic in a contract risk management is allocation of risk, which comes through your contract document. For example, there are clauses in the contract which says that this would form the part of employer's risk. This would form the part of would be insurable risk. This would form the part of maybe risk, maybe a limitation clause. What will be the overall risk liability? All these things of risk comes through a contract document. The performance of a party may be through risk, maybe through a document of performance security, performance security bank guarantee. Am I clear on this subject, please? Yeah. Secondly, now let me come to allocation of risk. Many a times what happens, as I said, as I explained, that the risk allocations comes through the contract document. The clauses in the contract must be such that the duties and responsibilities of parties to the contract are clearly spelled out in the contract. But if there is an ambiguity and we are not able to decide, the parties are not able to decide on the risk falls on whom, then the only remedy available is to go to the court of law or to file an arbitration to determine on whom the risk falls. So while the court would get into the details of on whose responsibility the risk falls, there are basically 4 questions the court would ask. The 4 questions which the court would normally ask in determining the risk is which party can best control the risk? Which party could best control the risk, or which party was associated with the risk? Which party can best foresee the risk? Which party can bear the risk? And which party ultimately most benefits or suffers when the risk eventuates? Risk allocation in construction contracts. The 4 maxims set out above are arranged in accordance with the importance when dealing with construction contract. Which party can best control the risk and for what it is associated with? The control of risk and the management of its consequences feature as the most common maxim of allocation used. For example, a defective material and a defective workmanship. This risk will fall on whom? It will fall on the contractor because he has used defective material and defective workmanship are allocated to the contractor, whereas the risk of handing over the site to the contractor on time is allocated to the employer. Second thing is, which party can best foresee the risk? The maxim of foreseeability of risk follows the control, and these are followed by financial ability to bear the risk and when it eventuates. Which party can foresee the risk? The maxim of foreseeability of risk follows control. The party who could have controlled the risk could see the foreseeability of risk, and these are followed by ability to bear the risk if and when it eventuates. Which party can best bear the risk? The first step in allocating the risk is to identify the party who appropriately owes a particular duty from which the risk might likely to eventuate, taking into account the works required to be carried out under the contract. These principles should be out in the contract or in its document, such as scope specification or drawings. The duties may then form the terms of contract or as prescribed under the law. Which party ultimately most benefits or suffers when the risk eventuates, it is then necessary to establish whether another party to the contract also has some element of controlling or preventing the risk or managing its consequences. If such party is identified of taking into account the actual circumstances surrounding the particular contract. It should be established whether a sharing of risk and its associated consequence is preferred allocation. So, gentlemen, what I'm trying to tell you is that allocation of risk becomes the most important document, comes through the contract document and becomes the most important thing. Why? Because drafting of a contract, therefore, is the most important thing when you're determining how the risk needs to be allocated to various parties in a contract. Allocation of risk is most important. If the risks are not allocated and well defined, then there will be a time when you need to approach the court or the arbitrator. The court and the arbitrator will ask 4 questions on whose control was who was controlling the risk, who was foreseeing. I read out all those four points to you, the 4 questions. Now I'm coming to slide 20, talking about project risk. Risk is an inherent part of delivery of any engineering project. It can take many forms, including rise of personal injury or death, damage to project itself or to a third party, and financial losses such as increase in project cost. Gentlemen, as I told you, in a project management, risk in a project management would involve either an insurable risk, which I would call damage to property, personal injury, infringement of patents. These are all risks, are insurable risks. These can be foreseen at the time of entering into a contract. But what cannot be foreseen is the operational risk. What are the operational risks? Operational risk may be delays or risk arising due to delay in completion of the project. These are operational risks. These operational risks. What is the other type of operational risk? Other type of operational risk would be delay in this cost getting incurred in the project. Overshooting the cost, planned cost, is one of the risks. Time and cost are things which are not insurable. Damage to property, damage to personal injury, these are all insurable risks, and that can be planned. But what needs to be well planned, what needs to be more attentive, we need to be more attentive to, is the time and the cost aspect of a project. So risk management is a tool to reduce both the time and the cost, the possible probability and the severity of risk events in an essential aspect of project delivery. The allocation of residual risk should be on the basis of parties best placed to manage and the financial risk. Now I'm coming to a very important topic, since we are mostly coming from from the profession of consulting faculty. In the context of professional liability, which comes into professional liability, the responsibility of an engineering consultant for activities should clearly be defined in an agreement between the client and the consultant. Generally, gentlemen, I would like to stress this point, because as a consultant, it is very important that your contract documents has no ambiguity in defining the activities that rest with the client and the consultant, because there is a liability which arises out of this, which we call as professional liability. Clarity of responsibility for potential risk arising out of the provision of professional services is an important element in management of this risk. A sensible allocation of risk is important. Of equal importance is the need for the risk to be properly financed. In the absence of effective forms of financing, the risk has been neither properly transferred nor managed. Why I am saying this? Because in an engineering consultant profession, we provide intellectual services. We do not provide capital services. So in engineering consultants provide intellectual services. They do not usually provide capital. Consequently, they can only finance through an appropriate insurance, which is usually professional indemnity insurance. So, gentlemen, in a professional rendering of professional services, as compared to rendering the services of a construction management, in a professional services as a consultant, you need to be very, very, very careful while you draft your contract, your consultant contract, because here you will be rendering professional services, and the liability could be a professional liability that could arise because of design defects. So one of the the insurance available for such things is a professional indemnity insurance, which you must take while you are rendering the services of a consultant to a party. Project risk is uncertain event or condition that occurs, has a positive or a negative impact on at least on project objectives. Project risk management includes the process concerned with conducting risk management, planning, identification, analysis, responses, and control on a project. So, gentlemen, now coming up to slide 22, which says when project risk eventuates, the impact could be one of the two possibilities: leading to damage of physical loss or injury, which is generally insurable. As I said in my talks, that there are two types of risk: known and unknown risk. Known risk are those which can be insured, The second is leading to economic and time and loss, that is generally not insurable. I talked about time and cost, which are not generally insurable. And that is the sector which calls for a risk management in place. For the time and cost, you have to have a risk management in place. For other risks, there are insurable. The insurable risks, you can take an insurance policy against those risks. But for time and cost, you do not have an insurance policy available. For performance of contracts, yes, you have the performance security which is given. That is a form of risk in the contract management. One of the way of ensuring your risk is taking a performance security bond from the other party. What that performance security bond does, it protects you against risk arising out of non-performance of a contract. The second insurable risk that may arise is by taking insurable risk with damage to property, damage to persons, infringement of patent rights. For all these risks, there is insurance is available. But for time and cost risk, no insurance is available. For performance and insurance is available for performance, that is performance security bonds. So in short, you have to be extremely careful while drafting your contract and allocating the risk well defined. The scopes of work in a contract need to be well defined as to whose scope the work will lie in, whose responsibility, who owes a duty towards that particular work. So when you prepare your schedule of works, you have to be very, very careful that all the risk involved in that schedule activity is well covered with respect to time, resource, then sequence of events. These are the things that you need to be well attentive while drafting out a contract, so that risks are well covered. Gentlemen, last but not least is that I am not running through the pages. I have given in my let's say type of effective risk control, and I have also dealt with effective risk control hurdles, which I would like that since it is long and time is short, I would not like to go through it step by step, but you can read it. The most important thing is slide number 26, review of proposed contract. Review of proposed contract must be done on every project with a focus on the following aspect of contract. Since this is a contract risk, I have listed out areas where you need to be very careful while you sign a contract. First of all, should be clarity of project definition. The project should be well defined. The scope of work should be well defined. Who under whose responsibility the scope comes? Supervision and staffing requirement in event of delays. What is the meaning of right to additional compensation in case of delays? Is your liquidated damages clause. You should have a well drafted liquidated so that there is no ambiguity in case there are delays. Then right to variations in contracts. These are right to additional compensation. What is when would be the right to variation comes? When there is a variation in scope of work. If there is a variation in scope of work, there is an entitlement for you, and that risk should be well covered in your contract document. There should be no ambiguity in drafting of contract in that particular clause. So, right to additional compensation in the event of delays, right to additional compensation for changes or extra work. Reporting requirements. Reporting requirements is if there is a delay, who should give the notice? Giving of notice in a contract document at the time of delay is very important. So reporting requirements must be well defined. Scheduling requirements. Scheduling requirements of what? Scheduling requirements is for the work activities that you do. It should be calendar marked. It should be calendar marked. Scheduling requirement should be calendar marked so that it is well defined in the contract. Review of shop drawings and submittals. Pay request administration. Change order administration. Site observation requirements. Quality assurance provisions. Inspection and testing requirements. Gentlemen, these are the few points which I would like you all to be careful while drafting your contract. These are very important so that the risk in a contract is well allocated. With this, I sum up my discussion. Thank you.
Thanks, Uttam. Thanks for that presentation on risk management of contracts. So important. We all are, all our work is enshrined through contracts as consultants, and to understand the risk, to allocate the risk correctly, to understand the importance of the contract document in itself with respect to risk and who should own it, how to mitigate it, and all those issues that you touched upon in the framework of the contract document are very, very critical for every consulting engineer. Thank you so much, Uttam. It comes obviously from your large experience on dealing with global risk in your various projects all over the world with Voltas and Siemens before that.
It's my pleasure.
Thank you, Uttam. Thank you. And this is not the end of it. We will be seeing more. A teaser has been given today. We shall be holding you to many more such events.
Yes.
Based on your experience, of course.
Yes.
Now, it's my pleasure then to call upon the next speaker. That is Dr. Vasant Matsagar. He will be speaking to us on multi-hazard consideration for assets, giving us a framework. Dr. Matsagar is the Dogra Chair Professor at the Department of Civil Engineering at IIT Delhi. He's also the chairperson of the Code for Multi-Hazards at the Bureau of Indian Standards, and an excellent speaker and a man with great knowledge in this area. I must tell you that not much in the world is totally codified with respect to multi-hazards. America probably has stolen on the march, has a steal on the march, but we in India are also now getting there because these things are happening. Multi-hazard visitations are happening in India, and Dr. Vasant Matsagar will be telling us about the framework for it in this talk. Sir, yours, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Harsha, for the introduction. Good morning to one and all. I would like to thank the Consulting Engineers Association of India for giving me this opportunity to talk about the multi-hazard considerations for assets and some frameworks. My predecessor speakers, Professor Krishnamurthy and Mr. Sengupta, they have very nicely set the stage for the risks. And now we are kind of changing the gears towards the hazards. And my focus will be on different kinds of hazards that our built infrastructure experiences during its life cycle or during the design life of those structures. When I talk about these infrastructures, it is not just limited to civil engineering infrastructures, but also a wide range of electrical engineering and other infrastructures as well. So I will quickly talk about what is the global picture in terms of the different hazards that these infrastructures are exposed to. Then what are the current practices, and then what are the new challenges that we are facing in terms of assessment of the multi-hazard, and what is the need of development of the analysis methods and the code development subsequently, as Dr. Harsha has mentioned. If I talk about the civil infrastructures, there are large number of structures of national importance, such as the Parliament building, as you can see here, or the court buildings, airports, or the hospital buildings. Most of these are strategically important. Some of them are lifeline structures like hospitals. If we talk about the energy sector, there are different setups for generation of energy, either onshore or offshore. And there are some historically important structures, such as the one that are shown here in the slides, including the residential apartments that we live in, and the lifeline structures, the communication network structures such as bridges and other kinds of structures. It is very important for all the structures to remain not only functional during any catastrophe or during any hazard, but also they should also serve the purpose that they are intended or built for. If I focus more on the energy side, there are different sources of conventional and non-conventional energies that we are extracting, such as the nuclear power plants or the hydroelectric power stations or the onshore or offshore wind turbines. Again, we need to ensure that all these structures, they remain functional even after a serious hazard takes place at a particular location. I especially bring your attention towards the wind turbine structures that are shown here. And this is one of the classical example of the multi-hazard situation, because a typical offshore wind turbine, it is exposed to several kinds of loads. Of course, its functioning itself is dependent on the wind regime that it is in, and thereby it is exposed to the loads imposed because of the wind. In addition to that, it is exposed to the wave loading, it is exposed to some accidental loading because of the ship. In addition, there are some undercurrents in water, and the foundation is exposed to those kind of loadings as well. So in general, these kind of structures which are exposed to different kinds of loading are required to be designed against these different loads. As you can very well see, that the occurrence of these different loading on the structure is not simultaneous, and thereby it is not necessary that we consider them all together and sum up the forces, but we have to consider as to what happens to the structure during its lifetime. If we have a look at historically how the structures have behaved, if we talk about the non-engineered structures, they have behaved very poorly during the hazards. This is just one simple example that I have taken during the Latur earthquake in 2001. After the earthquake was over, there was a survey conducted, and number of such unfortunate incidences of collapse of structures have been noted. I have just picked one out of that. But today we will talk more about the engineered structures, the structures which have been analyzed and designed by the engineers. And let us see how they have fared during some of these eventualities. This is the reinforced concrete modern structure, so-called engineered, and you can see the fate of it after a hazard has hit this location. And this is the infamous picture of the building that has failed during the Bruges earthquake in 2001. Now, we are talking about engineered structures here. However, during some of these hazards, these structures have experienced failure. And the examples are unfortunately quite a large in number of failure of structures during different kinds of hazards, be it earthquake, be it wind, or be it tsunami. So apart from these kind of residential or strategically important structure, there are some other residential types of structures which also needs an attention. However, even if we talk about the industrial structures, they are also equally important, and several of them are also lifeline structures. For example, water supply tanks or liquid retaining tanks in the industries. So as you can see, during the severe earthquakes in the California region, some of these tanks have failed. There is infamous example from Rajasthan where there is a leakage of oil and the tank has engulfed into fire. If we talk about the lifeline structures, I'm using this word lifeline structures, those structures which are required to survive during and after a calamity like earthquake, for example. And we can see how these bridges, which are lifeline structures, have fared during the earthquake. And now here, some of these pictures are from Japan, which is seismically quite prone. And it is seen that even in the country like Japan, the bridges have experienced failure. If we see in the Indian context, during the 2001 Bhuj earthquake, again, some of the bridges have experienced failure. There is another earthquake-prone region, which is the west coast of America, the California region, and there also some significant amount of damages and failures have happened in the bridges during and after the earthquake. So in nutshell, if we summarize, we categorize these hazards into two: natural hazards and accidental or man-made hazards, deliberate or accidental. So these hazards are, for example, the wind hazard or earthquake hazard, which are natural. Tsunami is also a natural hazard, and some of the accidental or the man-made hazards are deliberate blast incidences on the strategically important structures and their fire incidences. And when there is a blast, there might be a possibility of some ground vibrations, which are the blast-induced ground motion that the structures would be exposed to. In the modern structures, we do have certain control measures. We modulate the response of the structure by using advanced equipment or advanced devices. One such very popular device used in lifeline structures such as hospital is base isolation. And there, typically, we only focus on one hazard, unfortunately. For example, if we are designing a base isolation system for a hospital building, we design it for the earthquake ground motion possible at that location. However, we hardly pay attention how the same building which has been base isolated would respond to when it is exposed to some strong winds. Also, if we make this building quite flexible by interposing this layer of flexible isolation system, there might be some construction activities going on, or there might be some traffic, and there is a possibility that the patients who are serious here, they are admitted here in the hospital, they may have a feeling of uncomfort because of the flexibility that the building has and the vibrations are being felt here. Or in addition, in the industries, if there are some sensitive equipments kept here, they are opposed to higher acceleration. So all this is posing a risk of different kinds to the occupants or to the equipment in the structure. So in all, typically when we design a new building, we have loads and their combinations, and they are done statistically on a probabilistic scale. We see what is the exceedance limits for those loads, and we design the structures when they are new. However, unfortunately, we do not pay as much attention towards the life cycle assessment of that same design of the structure. If we consider that there is 100 years of design life of a structure, we decide some factor of safety, let us say 2, and at the beginning it is about 2 when it is newly built. But later on, after down the line 10 years or 20 years or 50 years, will the structure give the same factor of safety of 2? Probably not, because there is some aging effect, there is some deterioration in the material properties that would take place. And when that structure is exposed to one of these events or combination of them, then the structure may have higher risk imposed on it. Obviously, we do know that these events, they need not necessarily happen all at one time, as well as there are maintenance cycles as well. We strengthen the structure, we retrofit the structure. Given these inputs, still we need to have an assessment done as to when this kind of structure is exposed to different kinds of multi-hazards, how it would respond, and whether we have an increased risk or not. And what we have found is, yes, there is an increased risk if we do not pay attention towards designing these structures under the action of multiple hazards. So essentially, we are focusing more on those kind of events which puts the civil infrastructure into threat, such as the earthquakes, wind, blast, and fire. And these days, there is a tendency of using advanced materials, and it is not necessary that we know how they behave under these different actions. Like, for example, if there are some new materials used in the construction of, let us say, the wall panels, we are yet not so sure as to how it would respond when it is exposed to fire. When it comes to some of these important buildings such as hospitals, and if you are using some of these advanced materials, it becomes very necessary that whatever fire rating that is anticipated and required for a hospital building, whether that has been maintained or not. So on one hand side, we have to give importance to and look into as to how these loads are affecting the structure. On the other hand side, we have to also see how these materials and structural systems, they are responding to these different hazards. For example, there are some materials, they are very good in terms of fire resistance. However, the same material may not necessarily be good during the earthquake. If I talk about concrete, in that case, fire resistance is very good. However, it is a massive material, its density is higher, and it attracts larger inertial forces during the earthquake. I just gave one example. Also, the system that we have, structural system or structural framework, we need to have it in such a manner that there are redundant members which will be able to cater for failures of one member so that the other members are coming into picture. And our codes need to have incorporated these kind of provisions which are based not only on the possibilistic or deterministic approaches, but on the probabilistic approach. Why probabilistic approach are required? Because we need to see what are the return periods of these hazards, how many times the structure would be exposed to these kind of hazards, and with what intensity. And then accordingly, we have to design the structures against them. And unfortunately, most of these hazards, they do interact with each other. Even when they do not happen simultaneously, there are cascading effects of these hazards that happen one after the other, even not in the immediate succession, but over a period of few years. If we see globally, the number of such hazards or the number of such events occurring are quite a large in number. They are categorized into geophysical event, meteorological event, hydrological events, climatological events, and so on. And the diameter of the circle indicates the intensity of those hazards. And if you see the Indian peninsula, you would note that number of such events have happened, unfortunately, in India. Particularly if you see in the region of Himalayas, geophysical events have happened because of the subduction zone earthquakes. There are hydrological events have happened again in the similar in this region of northern India, and some meteorological events because of, let us say, the tropical storms have happened in the coastal regions of India. In addition to that, you would also note that climatological events have also happened in India. So in almost 1 year, all across the globe, there are more than 1,000 such events happen. And if we see what are the losses in the insured losses or overall losses, they are quite huge. And these are again categorized into different kinds of events. But I would also like to bring your attention towards the number of fatalities. This is very unfortunate that some of our engineered infrastructure, they are taking toll of such important human lives. And again, if we talk about some of these advanced countries such as Japan, the losses because of the failure of the infrastructure is quite huge. If we talk about India in specific, there are a number of climatological events which have caused fatalities. And if you see here, there are about 300 fatalities which are officially reported in one particular year of the assessment. If we see historically, the multi-hazard have been quite prominent, though it has not been seen from that perspective. For example, about 120 years back, there had been an very unfortunate incident in San Francisco City. It was hit by earthquake of magnitude about 7.8, and the built infrastructure there had been so that the earthquake resistance is quite high, and because of that, almost no failure of the infrastructure was experienced during the earthquake. However, that earthquake has triggered a fire, and those buildings were not necessarily designed against the fire, and thereby the fire has caused a lot of destruction in that whole area. More than 3,000 people have died, and almost 80% of the San Francisco city turned into ashes. And the insured loss during those days were $235 million US, which is equivalent to about $6.2 million US in 2015. Subsequently, in 1994 Northeast earthquake, similar kind of incidences of the fire following earthquakes have been noted, and in particular, the structures fared relatively better because they have been designed against earthquake. However, they were not necessarily designed against fire. Please note that this fire is occurring when the structure has experienced some damage, some extent of damage because of the earthquake, and therefore it is not the same structure. Disaster in 2011. A tsunami hit the east coast of Japan in 2011 because of a undersea earthquake of magnitude 9. And subsequent to that, there were fire hazards as well as the nuclear hazard, and it has caused huge losses of amounting to 35 billion US dollar as estimated by the World Bank. Apart from that, because of the radioactive gases leaked during this, again, some other losses have taken place. This is the example from the I-10 bridge collapse in 2015, and this bridge connects the California and Arizona on the west coast of US. What you see here is the span has gone down, and it has gone down because of the erosion at the abutment level. That erosion has happened because of the flood. However, flood has happened because of the rains, which are heavy rains, and heavy rains happened because of the storm that took place. So there are series of events that have happened, and because of the carrying away of the soil mass here, there is a failure of the bridge. Now, this is very interesting, particularly in the audience. I presume there are some structural engineers, so I will quickly show what has happened in similar cases and other places as well. Because of the heavy rains, there has been flood, and because of the flood, there is a scouring here. Because of the scouring, the effective length of the piers have increased. Earlier, it used to be L1 here from the pile cap to the pier cap, and now it has changed to L2. Subsequently, after a few months or years, the earthquake has taken place, and now earthquake is hitting that bridge, which has increased length. And we can understand from the first principle in the column buckling that the vulnerability of this column to earthquake forces in the lateral direction is significantly higher as compared to the original design. In this case, we are talking about two hazards, the flood hazard causing scouring and the earthquake hazard, which are not occurring simultaneously. However, they do have effect on each other, and similar incidences have happened or observed in the other locations as well. So if we talk about some such hazards, we need to check as to how our structures are faring, what is their probability of failure against some of these hazards, and we quantify them in terms of their intensity. For a given intensity, what is the probability of failure, and then we see whether it is acceptable or not, what kind of risk it is posing, and then we design them accordingly. Mostly we have talked about the natural hazard thus far. However, there are accidental or man-made hazards, particularly in the industrial setups. This is one of the examples that has happened in Mumbai 2016. In Dombivli, blast has occurred, and subsequent to blast, immediately fire hazard took place. Now we have two events. The second event, which is fire hazard, is triggered by the first hazard, and this category of multi-hazard is called cascading hazard, one leading to the other. Primary hazard is blast, secondary hazard is the fire. Similarly, there are some other events which take place simultaneously. Now, they are not even cascading. They happen, every hazard is taking place at the same time. For example, here, this is the example from Florida, where there were heavy rains, there was storm surge, and then flooding also has happened, and eventually it led to some fire incidences at some places, and it has caused more than 1,600 fatalities and insured losses of 10 billion US dollar and more. If we see the number of events, unfortunate events have happened across the globe, and if we see the statistics that has been presented by the Munich Reinsurance Company, again, unfortunately, there are a number of casualties that have taken place, both because of the natural events as well as because of the accidental or man-made hazards. And if we see whether they were really multi-hazards, so the answer is mostly yes. Most of them are the natural events, and these natural events were in the multi-hazard category. It means there is a presence of more than one hazard at a time. And there are some man-made hazards. Some of these are deliberate, and that has caused a lot of losses, insured losses during these hazards. So if we categorize and see as to how many, what is the domain which is affected because of single hazards or two hazards or three hazards, we find that typically 19% of the world's land cover is affected because of one hazard, and more than 50% of the population is affected. But now if we talk about the multi-hazard, either two or three hazards, you can see that 4 million square kilometer of land cover is affected because of the at least two hazards, and more than 800 million people are affected. If we talk about three hazards, then 0.5 million square kilometer of area of land cover across the globe is affected because of three hazards or more, and 105 million people are affected because of these multi-hazards. So we categorize these hazards into three simple categories. For example, one independent hazard, earthquake; other independent hazard, wind. They do not occur simultaneously, but during the design life of a structure, they happen one at a time. And thereby we have to see one structure which is getting exposed to both of them, how it responds and whether its response is acceptable or not. Similarly, if we talk about the other, for example, the post earthquake fire hazard, then the earthquake has triggered the fire hazard, and the fire hazard is thereby getting exposed to that structure which has experienced some damage. So there is a conditional probability of occurrence of these hazards, and then we check as to whether the risk that the structure is posed to, it is acceptable or not. Now, in both these cases, the hazards are not happening simultaneously, but there are certain other examples where they do happen simultaneously, and we need to check whether the risk posed to the structure is acceptable to us or not. And in this process, there are a number of stakeholders that are involved, such as structural designer primarily, but code writers in particular. As of now, unfortunately, the code is silent about the multi-hazard. Code does talk about the load, code does talk about the load combinations. However, code does not talk about the life cycle multi-hazard assessment of the structure. And most of these events have already highlighted the need for the codes to have this multi-hazard risk analysis incorporated in the codal provisions. And we hypothesize that multi-hazard risk analysis are not simply the sum of the single hazard risk, but we have to develop some possibilistic or probabilistic approaches in order to have this assessment done. If we compare our current practices as per the current code, do we really satisfy these requirements? So probably to some extent, the answer is fortunately yes. If we have some seismic provision incorporated wisely in our newly built infrastructure, and then we check the response of the structures to, let us say, a blast event, for example, we do find that yes, there is some improvement in its response. However, we need to have that assessment put in picture, particularly for strategically important structures which are vulnerable to the blast kind of events because of the new socio-political scenario. If I talk about one more parameter which is typically not considered so seriously in the design of the structure, and that is the corrosion related aging or deterioration of the structures. That has a serious effect on the response or the risk posed to the structure during its life cycle. And that needs to be factored in our codes, and we have to check as to whether the desired factor of safety has been achieved or not. So essentially, our ultimate goal is to lead to a multi-hazard resilient community having this code in place in future. So I have talked about how to have that assessment done and how to calculate the probability of failure against these different kinds of intensities of the hazard. So I'll quickly present one example of a multi-story building exposed to two different uncorrelated hazardous events such as the wind and earthquake. We have carried out this assessment and found out as to what is the joint probability of failure when the capacity of the structure is lower than the demand. Demand exceeds the capacity and failure takes place in one mode or the other. And in that process, we have given the equal energy to the structure, because one may argue that because the energy imparted are different, there might be a difference in their response. However, we imparted the same energy and tried to see how they respond. Their response have been completely different from one another. Due to paucity of time, I am skipping some of these slides and coming to the another case study that we have carried out. If we have certain advanced major devices used in the structures, particularly which are in the seismic prone regions, such as the dampers or the base isolation that I have talked about, typically we design it only for one event. However, if we check their response against the other event, when they have been designed for only one event, we find that their performance has not been satisfactory. And that typically happens in a particular range of frequencies. Again, in the design of structures, typically we do not pay much attention towards the frequency content. And we have compared their failure probabilities and what is the risk posed. And we found that unless we pay attention toward their design, there is a lot of risk imposed during the other hazard for which it has not been designed. We have also carried out this study for the industrial structures exposed to these different hazards. And interestingly, we found that the braced infrastructure or braced industrial shed is more vulnerable to the earthquake than that of the wind in this case. I think I'm exceeding my time, so I will conclude my presentation with a case study that we have carried out for the life cycle analysis. And what we have found is that the building is experiencing some damage because of the ambient wind loadings as well. Within the 50 odd years, we are experiencing the first damage in the modern building. This we have carried out a case study on a real life building in Japan. Similar studies have been carried out. If a structure is exposed to one hazard first and then the other hazard, its safety level or its factor of safety reduces down quite drastically. So in summary, the codes that we currently have needs to be updated. I had a fortune of serving as a committee member in the development of National Building Code, and there we have included this chapter on multi-hazard risk analysis. However, the Indian standard codes are yet to have them incorporated. So my appeal to all the audience is to give due attention towards the multi-hazard assessment in our analysis and design of the structures. With this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Matsagar, for this very illuminating talk and opening our minds and our eyes up to what actually happens with multi-hazard situations that we need to deal with and even come into codification, and the lack of the codes actually where we are lacking and what needs to be done, and the various studies that you're doing to try and arrive at some methods to quantify this and codify it. I think this is a frontier area, definitely, not only in India, but internationally. Definitely internationally, none of us are so clued on this matter. I might argue that none of us are so clued in this matter. And that probably is because a lot of probability is involved, a lot of fully nonlinear analysis are involved, a lot of things, very advanced techniques are involved, and combination of techniques, in fact, are involved, and very fast Fourier transform, spectral analysis. So many advanced methods are being invoked that the common structural engineer doesn't interface with it. But what is important is that unless we do those, we will not be able to arrive at some codification norms and look at the whole life cycle resilience of an asset. What we do at the moment is, dots in the system rather than looking at the whole. And we're not looking at the multi-hazard across the life cycle of the structures. What you really brought out, which I think is, it's on the point that we all have to wake up and do something about this now. Thank you, sir. Thank you for this amazing talk. And we hope that as a friend of the CI, you will remain with us and deal with consultants and structural engineers and other engineers who are involved, geological engineers, so many others, wind engineers. It's a I would say a multifaceted issue that is involved, a multidisciplinary, multifaceted issue which is involved in trying to come to grips with this. So I would like you to remain a friend of CI and be with us, sir, and educate us a little more in the future also. Thank you for being with us. Thank you very much. The next speaker, we have 4 speakers, which follow in quick sessions of 10 minutes each. The first, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Rajat Temni. In fact, Rajat is a very, very close friend and a core committee member of the CI Western region, and has been leading our CI on various webinars and seminars in the past on dealing with contracts, arbitration, dispute resolution, and the like. Rajat is a partner at Tully and Company, who are advocates and solicitors, and there he heads the practice of dispute resolution. He's internationally acknowledged, and he has been in arbitrations such as the ICC, the LCIA, and SIAC, all international arbitration issue courts. And he's been involved across various core areas: construction, engineering, insurance, reinsurance, private equity, sports, and media. And he regularly appears before various courts on high value and complex disputes at different high courts and other tribunals in India. With that, Rajat, can I request you to speak on evaluating legal risks in contracts, a small part of it? Thanks.
Thanks for that introduction, Dr. Subbarao. Good afternoon to everyone. I'm grateful to the CAI for providing this opportunity to share my thoughts on legal risks in contracts. I want to say a few words on the legal risks which arise while drafting and enforcement of contracts, and I want to do that with reference to the termination clauses in agreements. These clauses, as we all know, are extremely important because they are mechanisms to bring the contract to an end and prescribe events which may give rise to the party or one party or the other to discharge its obligations. The clause also determines and is directly relevant to the question of damages or compensation that may be payable. If there is a breach of the termination clause in the sense that the conditions or the stipulation or the procedure which is laid down in the termination clause is not followed, then there are far-reaching consequences that result. The termination itself may be held to be illegal. Alternatively, damages may be awarded for failure to comply with the termination clause. Proper drafting of termination clauses is therefore essential. It is a clause that brings to an end the contract, but it does not mean that it should be the last clause that parties who are negotiating and drafting it should consider. It should have a pride of place, and a proper appreciation of facts, expectations should be undertaken before drafting this clause. Now, coming to the bullet points, in most commercial contracts, as we are all aware, the termination clause allows a party to terminate for material breach. And if there is an obligation on the party to provide the defaulting party a specified period of whether it's 14 days, 30 days, 60 days. Now, material breaches are serious breaches, but do not amount to a fundamental violation of the contract itself. There are judgments and cases which have defined the ambit of a material breach, where the courts have held that this must include an actual breach of at least some degree of seriousness, but it need not be repudiatory. In fact, by their very nature, material breaches are those which are capable of being remedied to the giving of notice and breach remaining unremedied after a specified period of time. This group of rights which are available under the contract are expressly available. They are what we can refer to as an express contractual right to terminate the contract in case of material breach. But then as we go down the slide, what happens when a fundamental or a repudiatory breach happens? Indian law also recognizes that the ordinary common law remedy of termination for a fundamental breach is available to a party. If there is an irremediable breach of a contract, then it is possible for the terminating party that it does not have to give notice. It does not even have to provide a cure period to the defaulting party. There are cases and judgments both in India and in the UK which suggest that the termination cannot be limited to only those grounds that are set out in the contract, or merely because the termination clause only refers to those grounds that the party is is somehow disentitled from exercising its ordinary common law remedies. Those judgments have also held that the express contractual right to terminate, which we just discussed moments back, and its consequences is additional to, but it does not take away the ordinary rights of termination for repudiation at common law. Clear words have to be inserted in order for the termination or for repudiation to be excluded. Now, the last slide, the last bullet point on this issue is what are the consequences of a repudiatory breach? Here, I'd like to briefly touch upon, I'm sure most of the audience would be aware about it, but I just wanted to briefly touch upon the meaning of a repudiatory breach and how these are different from material breaches. So we've talked about the material breach, we've talked about the usual contractual stipulation, and now we're referring to something different, which is the repudiatory breach. Now, the repudiatory breach refers to an action, it refers to a scenario where a party has been substantially deprived of the very essence of its bargain by actions or conduct of the other party, which signify that he does not want to be bound by that contract. In such a situation, the non-defaulting party, that is to say, the party who has not, who is innocent, who has not committed any default, does not need to continue and has the option, first, of accepting that repudiatory breach, second, bringing the contract to an end, and third, claiming damages. The reason that this repudiatory breach arises is because parties enter into a contract with a certain expectation that is reduced in the writing in the form of the contract. Now, if by words or by actions or by conduct, one of the parties refuses persistently to fulfill his part of the bargain, then clearly the contract has to be brought to an end and the innocent party cannot be compelled to be dragged along in such a contract. To put it in other words, an act to constitute a repudiation of a contract, it must be such that it gives a clear indication of the refusal to perform the other party's obligations. And therefore, because one of the parties refuses to perform his obligations, the other party is discharged from the performance of his own obligations or duties under the contract. By way of illustration, where there is an insolvency event which occurs, it would give rise to immediate grounds to terminate. There could also be other situations where there could be a complete deadlock between parties. There could be certain actions that may have been taken by one party, which leads to a complete loss of confidence. It leads to loss of trust. It leads to loss of good faith. In those sorts of situations, whether or not a termination clause provides for bringing the contract to an end, these are matters which would fall within the ordinary rights of termination or the repudiatory breaches. Now, the termination clause, as we have been discussing, has to be drafted properly to assess whether it only deals with the material breach, which is capable of being remedied, or it also deals with the general common law remedy that we've just discussed. A clause providing for termination in the event of a material breach, but which can only be actioned after giving of notice, will by itself not prevent a sufficiently serious breach from amounting to a repudiation of the contract, which means such a clause will generally provide for a right to terminate, which is in addition to a party's common law rights. There could be instances where there is no clarity. A party may think that the agreement cannot be terminated unless he receives a notice or a cure period has been given. However, that may not be the case, and this may give rise to unexpected consequences. It also leads to a great deal of contract uncertainty because there are certain clauses in the termination section itself which stipulate the grounds, say events of default, on the basis of which termination can happen. Now, one party might consider that apart from these, there will not be any other grounds on which termination could occur. But as we have discussed, there is a critical difference between material breaches, which are defined in the contract, which give you the express contractual remedy, and the ordinary, the common law breaches, which may not be specifically captured in the agreement, but which are present nevertheless. If there is a mix-up between those two and the contract does not clearly stipulate what are the grounds which are going to be sufficient to terminate, it will give rise to unintended consequences and it will give rise to contract uncertainty. In this light, therefore, the parties should, prior to the conclusion of the contract, conduct a risk assessment and evaluation of the business, the potential risks, the hazards that they face, and in light of that background, they should give appropriate thought to the drafting of the termination clause. There has to be clarity on the circumstances in which the contract can be terminated. As discussed, there are a range of rights which can bring the contract to an end. Some of them may be provided in the contract. Some of those are not provided in the contract but are nevertheless available. Also, the parties need to be aware of the legal developments, including judicial pronouncement, regulations, codes of business, etc., so that they are fully aware that the contract and the termination clauses that they are drafting are valid, they are legal, and they are completely enforceable. All of this would definitely serve to mitigate the risk of uncertainty in contract drafting and effectively assist in evaluating the legal risk so as to ensure that the parties' bargain is actually and realistically captured in the contract. Given the time constraints, this is all I propose to saying about the legal risks or evaluating legal risks in contracts. I again thank CAI and all of you for your time and patience in hearing me out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rajat. That was wonderful, an introduction, albeit a small part of what we need as consultants, a very important part, and that on terminating contracts, how it can be done, the safeguards that you need to be alerted to bring in, the handling of risks in such eventualities through the use of good language, clever drafting, and the looking at the legal writing of such a termination clause is so critical, which engineers and contract managers generally tend to, the tendering side, all of us generally tend to overlook. And we don't look critically at the way the termination clauses are written and could be invoked by either parties, and the risks entailed thereafter to the enterprise or to the individual, as the case may be. So thanks for alerting us to that and making us recognize that that is a very, very important clause indeed to have in the framework of risk, especially legal risk. Thank you so much. The next speaker we have is Dr. Nikhil Pujari. Nikhil has completed his PhD from from Indian Institute of Technology, and Bombay, under the supervision of Professor Siddhartha Ghosh. He's done a lot of work on seismic fragility, numerical modeling, reliability, earthquake hazards, and uncertainty quantification and statistical analysis. Some papers to his credit, and his PhD, of course. He is currently working with Willis Tower Watson in Mumbai as a senior specialist in the model research and evaluation team. He is involved with hazards, vulnerability, and financial module of different vendor models. Prior to that, he was working in Risk Management Solutions, which is an international company, as a vulnerability modeler. So vulnerability damage functions for various kinds of structures were his forte. Let us hear from him. Thanks, Nikhil, to you.
Thank you, Dr. Subarao. First of all, I'd like to thank CAEI for giving me this opportunity to talk about industrial catastrophe modeling and techniques. And secondly, I'd just like to state that all the views presented here are solely mine and kind of generic in nature, and in no way views of Willis Stars also. So with this, I'll begin my slide. My topic will be on catastrophe modeling and industrial outlook. These are the broad contents of the topic. So I'll be going through what catastrophe modeling is in the first three. I'll be talking about the anatomy of catastrophe modeling, hazard module, vulnerability, and finally kind of trying to give you an essence of what actually we hand over to clients. So what is catastrophe modeling? Basically, catastrophe modeling is a computer simulated model where you make models for natural catastrophes like earthquake, hurricane, floods, and wildfire, with the sole intention of the revenue. That is basically what premium you should pay in case there is a catastrophe for natural catastrophe at your location. Why do we need catastrophe models? These are again very generic in nature, but I guess I don't need detailed explanation. So I'll just go through the points. One is life safety, risk mitigation. You see levee structures being non-levee structures, so spread of the flood is higher, whereas here you see due to the levee structures, the flood is mitigated in this region. Structural safety, understanding the underlying science, the hazard and damageability of a property, and definitely capital protection. Just like we have a lot of rains during the rainy season, and most of the times, there's a lot of flood-like situations in Northeast and say Bihar region. So suppose if there is a damage of say 100 crores in a particular region, instead of paying the whole 100 crore, if you insure the assigned areas, you probably just have to pay 1 crore insurance a premium to protect the whole 100 crore. That's why we say we're mitigating the risk to insurance companies. And obviously, all this comes under the ambit of insurance policy. I'll go with what is the origin of catastrophe model. So the first documented evidence is like somewhere in 1880s in US, where insurance were being sold for 5. Later on the mainstream research front, say from 67 for flood hazard, 69 for earthquake, 72 for hurricane. Kind of these research led to the hazard compilation and loss studies into the research and gradually into the industry, which is catastrophe industry. Later on, it led to around about in 87 and 88, there was the first commercial model for catastrophe by AIR and later by RMS, and in 94 by EQCAT. Definitely with the advent of commercial models, there was a first open source model by FEMA. It was named as Jesus earthquake model, which was released in 1992. But going on to the anatomy of catastrophe model. So basically here in this slide is the essence of what catastrophe model is. We have the hazard first, which is the geophysical properties of an earth in case of say earthquake or flood, or the climate variables in case of hurricane or wildfire. The vulnerability side tells you the damageability in the structure, gives so basically a structural engineer's work. Exposure is the amount or the total value of the property which is being insured. Loss is it includes many factors like in your insurance policy, there might be limit deductible. So those financial components come here. And finally, the most important is the platform. It's the interface in which kind of you run these analysis and you give those outputs. Moving on to the first section, hazard module. Basically, a broad classification can be divided into two parts: stochastic event generation, which is very important for to generate or simulate the historical events, and finally the hazard event assessment, wherein we use specifically say GMP equations to validate the hazard. Moving ahead, I will try to draw a comparison. Like what we have to be figure in the left is the Indian Code IS 1893 Part 1 2016, which is a broad classification of how the seismic zonations is in India. As you see, the darker colors are more riskier zones, whereas lighter colors, you see blue zones, are less riskier zones. Trying to draw analogous to what we have to the left, we have Bhuj earthquake here. So this is a real-time event response or from the USGS website. So what we have is we have a small, you can say the epicenter here, and the different colors signify the intensity or MMI scale in this figure. And the table to the bottom, which we have, is a modified Mercalli's index over here, which is kind of a correlation matrix with what those intensities correlate to the peak ground acceleration or peak ground velocity. So this table kind of helps us to interchange and talk to clients directly, like this is the intensity which your area or your zone is supposed to will face. Next, moving to the vulnerability section. This is a plain structural engineer's work. Like just go through the figure over here. On the x-axis, we have the PGA. It is the same which I showed in the previous slide. It can be MMI, PGB, or spectral acceleration. And to the y-axis, we have the mean damage ratio, which is basically the loss of the insured structure versus the total cost of the structure. Definitely, since it's a ratio, the range is between 0 to 1. The four main components as to how we design the vulnerability are the occupancy class, which is basically a single family dwelling. Is it a multifamily, commercial, or industrial? The construction type, which is a few examples: wood, masonry, steel, concrete. Height of the story or number of floors, on what category of floors it is, and year build. So we take into factor these four main categories to kind of try to define what is the probable damage in your location. Again, a comparative analysis as to how different construction classes vary with respect to vulnerability. Over here, as we see, the adobe structures, which is a mud-like structure, fails quickly with minute change in the intensity, whereas steel structure, you see, being a ductile structure, it gives a good stretch and good resistance to structure. So only at high PGA levels or intensity levels, you can see failure of the structure. Moving almost to the final part now. So the in mathematical terms, we do a convolution of seismic hazard and seismic vulnerability, which I spoke about, kind of giving us the final EP curve, which is called as exceedance probability curve or return period curve. So what we see here is on the x-axis is the losses in $1 million, or you can say million rupees, and the exceedance probability, or you can say return period. So it's actually inversely proportional to each other. So higher the return period, lower is the exceedance probability. Like say for the return period of say 10,000, higher will be the losses. So when I say return period, it is the event return period in this particular case. So high event or high magnitude events will definitely give us high losses, and kind of at every location, kind of we have these kind of EP curves or risk, RP curves or return period curves. So this is the final slide and kind of the very important slide which I'd like to highlight. So what we have here is something like we try to give out to our clients usually, and it's a general industry practice also. So we have two models, model A and model B, let us say, and we have three different all the numbers here are in $1 million. We have residential and commercial properties. The AAL is basically the average annual loss or the pure premium or the premium which has to be paid. And we have highlighted three different return periods, which is 250, 500, and 1,000. And why I have taken this? Because this is the most commonly accepted return periods in industry. And if you're about to secure your portfolio, you definitely would like to have a look at these return period numbers. So now that I've given an outlook, let's dive into the numbers here. Clearly, what we can see from the first highlighted thing is, say residential structures for location A for 250-year return period, we see model B gives us significantly, like almost 7 times higher losses than model B. This is the comparison between residential, but if you go look for the different commercial zones, like it is twice, whereas in this case model B gives half the size. So what I'm trying to signify, every model captures different details, so we need to understand what is being captured in every, and we basically do the background or science behind this and try to bring out the reasons as to why are these numbers coming. Moving ahead, location B, you see lesser losses than location A. In this case, model B gives lesser losses than model A, which is the opposite in previous case. Here it's almost 4 times the commercial structures, whereas here again you see a diametrically opposite, model B giving less losses than residential. And finally, like location C is giving the least losses of A and B. Again, model C in the residential location C in residential for model B gives higher losses than this, but significantly higher losses in commercial zone, whereas say moderately higher losses. So basically, whenever we give, we have to kind of compile these results and show to clients. So for them to understand what is the risk appetite for their insured locations, at the same time, what different models are trying to tell. It so happens at many times that the clients kind of cannot understand, like as you see, it's heads and tails, like a very diametrically opposite views. So at times we also try to adjust some losses and try to give them a neutral view, or you can say our own view of risk in such cases. So that's it. And these are the references which I guess will be helpful for anyone to go through and understand things in detail. Thank you.
Thanks, Nikhil. Thanks for telling us about catastrophe modeling and how you go about quantifying the risk in some way and putting numbers and costs to it and the premiums thereof and the RE industries to whom you advise and these issues which are important to handle the eventualities of risks arising and how to buy your premiums, how to safeguard yourself through an insurance scheme, how those are to this catastrophe modeling technique that is used in the industry, and also pointing out that different models may give different values. There is high variability even in those, and therefore at the end of the day it is the expertise, I guess it's your expertise which will bring to the fore and argue the point as to what should be the actual numbers that should be adopted for premiums and the like. Thanks, thanks for that. The next speaker we have here is Mr. Abhishek Pal. Mr. Abhishek Pal is known to many of us, definitely known to me as a friend and person from the Bureau of Indian Standards. We work together on many codes, and he's here today to tell us about the work of the Bureau of Indian Standards, which does a hell of a lot of work behind the scene, and what they are doing with respect to hazards, the Indian codes and standards relating to hazards and risks. He is senior scientist C in Civil Engineering Department at the Bureau of Indian Standards. Mr. Abhishek Pal, sir, go ahead.
Hello. Thank you, sir. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you for such opportunity for sharing my view, sharing the BIS works on hazard and risk, especially in civil engineering and structural engineering works. And I'll start with, since I would like to, congratulate CAI for such a, very good webinar. It's a great webinar on such topic. And we'll start from here that as you are aware that good management is very much required for completing the work in efficient manner, avoiding time and cost overrun at the same time ensuring safety of people and labor working there. So in view of this, BIS has completed the series of Indian standard on construction project management guidelines, and the last standard we have published that procurement management and sustainability management and human resource management in 2021, and we have completed this standard. However, we are also working on procurement management, a next part of procurement management, which will include contract management. Apart from that, we have published the code of construction project formulation and appraisal, as well as guideline for habitat and welfare requirement for construction workers. Also, BIS has standards relating to safety during construction, covering every phases of construction project, from excavation to substructure construction to superstructure construction. This code covers like these operations like excavation, drilling, blasting, piling, deep foundation and tunneling, then demolition, steel erection and concrete erection, and this type of, and for common hazards. So from next slide, most of the I am listing out all the codes are here, and I'll not go through it in the entire, and you can see after this webinar you can see go through this presentation. So as you can see that all the, from excavation to foundation to superstructure, substructures, these all codes are for every phases, and these safety codes are related to excavation, then related to substructures, then related to superstructures, and these safety codes for addition and alteration or demolition of buildings. And as you are aware, as you can see that these are very old code, but since you must appreciate that we are revising this code, and we have our main CD 29 sectional committee, which construction management including safety in construction sectional committee, which these are revising these codes, and almost all the codes, almost 20 codes are under revision, and we are dealing with all the drafts Indian standards of these codes. And this is for enabling works like scaffolding and ladders, material and machinery. And the other safety codes, it's not necessarily in civil engineering only. I mean, we have our chemical department. They are also having safety codes relating to masks and gloves also. So these are other safety codes, and these are all under CED 29, as you can see. And these are safety equipments and science. Mostly they are related to, our chemical department has um, already published these codes, and they are also revising. So in a way, we are revising all the standards which are very either old or prior to 2000. We are in our higher management want that we'll revise all these codes in near future. So these are codes of safety equipments and science, as you can see on screen. And then selection, maintenance and care of safety equipment. These codes, all the codes are related to OSHAs and monitoring. As you can go through these codes, of course. And after that, I'll cover the structural safety aspects. So we have another sectional committee, that is structural safety sectional committee, which cover the area of include mostly loading standards are there. So recently we have published IS 875 part 3, that is on wind loading code in 2015, and snow loading code is under publication, and very soon in July or August it will get published, and you can see that code. And ongoing projects will revise this dead load, imposed load, and special load and load combination, other parts of these IS 875. And apart from that, we are also thinking about risk assessment and structural health monitoring type of code in near future. And this is our earthquake engineering sectional committee, which major area is like design and construction of earthquake resistant structure in the field of instruments and tests connect therewith. So standards formulated in last few years are 1893 part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, and this after that ductile designing code 13920, then evaluation and strengthening of existing RC buildings IS 15988, and earthquake resistant design and construction of building IS 4326. Apart from that, ongoing projects, these are very active committee, CD 39. So we are making new standards on tsunami resistant, then for dam and embankments, then probabilistic seismic hazard map of India, then seismic design principle, performance based design, and these are the list which are ongoing project. And apart from that, new standard on this liquefaction potential of soils, then seismic qualification of equipment, and response spectra, post earthquake damage assessment of buildings. So in near future, you will see all these codes are, in your hand, of course. Then we have another sectional committee, that is CED 48 and CED 56, that is hill area development and landslide control. And this deals with development activities in hilly areas, including retaining wall, landslide control, and hazard zonation. So recently we have published a series of IS 14558, that is retaining wall for hill area, in which dry stone masonry walls, cement stone masonry walls, gabion walls are there. Then we have published mesozonation map of landslide hazard zonation maps. Then preparation of landslide risk assessment maps in mountainous terrains. Then IS 17162, which covers site specific investigations and stability analysis of landslides. And these two are very active committee, and they are working on landslide risk assessment maps in mountainous terrains, geogrids, and soil nailing in near future. And this is, this is the last slide, and this is cyclonic resistant structure, which covers design and construction of cyclone resistant structures and building protection from high speed winds, warning from cyclone and tidal waves, and post cyclone rehabilitation measures. Standard published in last few years, that improving and cyclonic resistance of low rise buildings, then building typology in cyclone prone areas, then guidelines for design and construction of cyclone shelters. And ongoing projects are cyclonic resistant lifeline structures and safety from high wind and related hazards. Apart from that, this is last slide. Apart from that, I would like to add that we have, I mean, design codes like IS 456, IS 800, as well IS 801. That is for light gauge steel structures, and we are revising all these codes in near future, of course, and very soon. I mean, these all cover, since good design always ensure you say the safety of structures. So with these remarks, I would like to thank CAI, and I would like to thank all of you for giving me such opportunity and for your patience. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Abhishek Pal. Thank you very much for bringing out the various standards that BIS already has and some on which they're working, and the various documents that one could refer to, which are codal documents of the BIS, covering cyclones, earthquakes, tsunamis, and landslides, and so many hazards that you brought out, and dealing with them through safe design, if it's a matter of design, or through management, good management, all these serving then to mitigate risk for the built asset or the environment in which we are working. Thank you very much, sir. And we are always with the BIS, and many of us are on committees and we contribute, and we are very proud to be associated with BIS always. Look forward to further collaborations with you also. On that note, let me then ask the next speaker, that is Mr. Pranav Patel. Mr. Pranav Patel is a Senior Vice President at Marsh India, Insurance Brokers Private Limited. Pranav, can you screen your first slide?
Sure.
Okay, yeah. Pranav is, Marsh is a very famous company, as many of you may know, and they deal with project risks and insurance. Go ahead. And they're brokers dealing with these matters, insurance brokers. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Harshavardhan. So I'll be speaking to you about project risks and insurance. So this is a very specialized topic, and ultimately risk and insurance go together. Risk management and insurance of risks see eye to eye. So the first step is to identify the risks. After that, we have to transfer the risks, either contractually or through insurance. Insurance is actually not for everything. There are certain risks that are insurable, certain that are uninsurable. Idea is to transfer optimally, whether it is through contract, between owner and contractor, and also between insurance company. So I'll just be taking you through some of the broader aspects of risk and insurance when it comes to projects. So when it comes to projects, if you were to list down very broadly, the key risks that any project would be exposed to, it would be political, it would be regulatory. Political, especially if it is an overseas project, there's a cross-border element to it. Then the political risk element is exemplified and it's enhanced. The economic risk, the currency risk, and the forex risk. This is when there's a large amount of imports, imported equipment, imported contractors. There could be foreign consultants. Then is the offtake risk, particularly for power projects. Supply feedstock risk, that would be pretty much across the board. The construction risk itself, completing the project on time. Operation risk, the interface between construction and operation, that is very important. The technical risk, which would be largely the design risk. And then, of course, there would be the employees, the staff, the security. So these would be broadly the types of risks that any large project would entail, which would be the parties to a project. If you were to list the various stakeholders, it would largely be the owner, being the project principal and the party with maximum stake at risk, the contractors, then the lenders, the designer. The contractors can be further divided into labor contractor, the original equipment manufacturer, and the material supplier. So these are the main parties to the risk, and each of them have got something to lose if the project suffers a loss, does not complete in time, if there is any hindrance to the project of any sort. Then these are the stakeholders who will stand to lose, and that is the reason why their interest has to be taken care of. Now, the cost of risk, every risk is associated with a cost. If the risk were to occur, if there were to be an event, then clearly it has to be quantified, the risk. And if we were to arrive at the cost of risk for the project as a whole, one would need to take into account the various elements that we spoke about earlier, which is the finance cost, the permits, the approvals, the design risk, the development risk, the material risk, the labor risk. All of this would capture, and form a part of the cost of risk of the project. Now, just to bifurcate between the construction and operational phases of the project, of course, the constructional risk would be the completion, the engineering risk, which would basically be from a safety perspective and from a design perspective, and the force majeure risk. Force majeure are the events which are out of the control of the project parties. And then, of course, are the operational risks, which are the supply risk, the market risk, the operations risk, the environmental risk, the infrastructure risk, the force majeure. Again, force majeure is for construction and operations, the political risk, the legal, and the forex risk. So these would be the risks which would form a part of the operational phase. Now, based on the various phases of the project, we can again divide the risk. Of course, any project starts with design and fabrication. Then comes the movement of the project cargo to the project site. Then is the erection and storage of the equipment and materials at the project site. Then is the testing and commissioning. After testing and commissioning is the operational phase. So based on the various project phases, if we were to divide the various elements of risk during the blueprint stage, which is the design stage, of course, would be the faulty design, the defective material, the fabrication, manufacturing defects. Then, of course, is the transit risk, which would be the loading, unloading, worthiness of the carrier, whether it's the land carrier, it could be an ocean carrier as well, the material loss, packing, the weather conditions. Then there's the delay in startup. If there is a loss during transit of critical cargo, this would delay the commencement of the commercial operations, which is the delay in startup risk. Then is the erection and storage part, wherein storage risk is very critical. Once the material arrives at the site, erection, handling, and accidental losses of project equipment. Faulty workmanship like welding and it could be installation, it could be the civils, it could be the plant and machinery. Natural hazards, this would form a major part of the risk profile of any project. Liabilities to first parties as well as third parties, and completion risk we've already spoken about. Then testing and commissioning, which is the most critical part of any project. That is when the concentration of risk is the maximum, and any failure during this phase can result in large losses. So the risks during the testing and commissioning phase, once the mechanical completion has been done and the feedstock is introduced, the utilities are again, completely, connected to the main plant. So that's where we feel the risk concentration is the highest. So here the human error element, because even the staff and the manpower is quite new to the project. They are still to get used to the various systems and the plant as a whole. You'll have third parties guiding the main team carrying out the testing and commissioning. But still, since it's a new plant, it's a new asset, testing and commissioning, and human error is, of course, I'd say pretty high on the list of risks. Then there is the material damage, inadequate performance, the equipment malfunction, considering these equipments are new. They really have not been, hot tested. Feedstock has not been introduced in them. So the equipment malfunction, and all this will translate into completion risk. So any of these risks which lead to a loss can lead to a delay in completion of the project. Now, talking about insurance, since that is, I would say, my key domain strength. During the transit of the cargo from the supplier's premises to the plant site, marine insurance would form the main insurance cover for this particular element, that is the transit element. Then once the material reaches the project site, you have to, set it up. You have to install it. You've got to, complete the civils and install the plant and machinery prior to testing and commissioning. So right from storage to erection, installation, mechanical completion, and finally testing and commissioning, all of this is ensured through an erection all-risk policy or a contractor's all-risk policy. That is the contract works. And of course, you'll have other elements of insurance as well, mainly the contractor's plant and machinery. So this is normally not insured as a part of the erection all-risk or contractor's all-risk cover. It can be, but to a very limited extent. So you'll have a separate policy for the contractor's plant and machinery, which is the cranes, the excavators, it can be the dumpers, it can be, the forklifts. Also, all these, the construction plant and equipment is insured through a CPM policy. And after the testing and commissioning is complete and your operational policy commences, the handover happens from the contractor to the principal. That's when your operational policy comes into play, and there is an overlap during these, during this phase. And also there is the maintenance period, which is essentially a part of the operational phase, but technically this is covered as a part of the project policy. So the policy will be the project policy. If a loss were to happen during the maintenance period due to faulty erection or due to any visits during this period, the loss will be picked up during the EAR, by the EAR policy. But if it's an operational peril, if there is an act of God peril, it could be a fire and explosion peril, purely because of operational risks, then that will be picked up by the operational policy. And this interface that happens just when the assets have been commissioned and transferred from the project phase to the operational phase, this is a very, very critical period. Now, if you were to analyze the main causes of losses that we have seen for projects across the globe, across sectors, and this is, this information has been derived from a reinsurance company. We will see that faulty design is the main reason for losses for all large projects. So the design risk has to be dealt with very, very carefully. Faulty execution, again, would be next, and this would be at the project site. So faulty design is, of course, prior to the materials coming to the site. It could be the detailed engineering design. It could be the basic engineering design. That is, that's a different subject altogether. But the faulty design is the number one risk, followed by faulty execution. Faulty material would be next. Human error, that's negligence, would be next. Faulty material at an off-site location, for the materials which are really fabricated off-site, that would be the next risk. Natural events would be after that. Organizational deficiencies, this is within the contractor's organizational framework. It could be the owner's project team as well. So this would be the second last risk. And wrong input data, and this would dovetail with the faulty design when the specifications have been wrong. That would be last on the risks which have contributed to losses for large projects. So that's it from me, and happy to take any questions, but I'll try to capture the key project risks, hazards, and how it relates to insurance in the time span that's allocated. It's a very, very vast subject, but a very broad overview is what I just gave you.
Thank you, Pranav. We have been associated with Marsh before in our other events on contracts and contract management and other events, as you might know. And we look forward to your continued engagement with the CI, Marsh and CI. Of course, this is only a small brief that you could get, but the subject is a huge subject and it requires further deliberation at another event. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for being with us.
Most welcome, sir. Most welcome.
Wonderful. Now, the time has come to, start to wrap up the session, and I would request, from my point, I can say we've had excellent presentations today. Most thankful to all the speakers. It has been my pleasure to moderate this session, and I think we've put across a number of views and a number of issues for consultants and owners and all types of stakeholders involved with projects, involved with organizations to deal with risks and hazards, and to come up with various issues through this debate is our goal. And I think we achieved that somewhat quite well today. Malsab, I will call on you then to say a few words, or if any questions are there in the panel, anybody, are there any questions? I didn't see. There is one question, Mr. Mal has replied. Okay. Malsab, it's your floor, you go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Subbarao. I think it's been an excellent session that we've had today. And I must thank all the speakers and the panelists who've come in for being with us, especially starting with Dr. Krishnamurthy, who gave a very good general overview that it starts right from your doorstep or rather inside your house itself. Hazardous risk is not something alien to any one of us. Then there were people who talked about the legal aspects. There were two of them, Mr. Uttam Sengupta, as well as Mr. Rajat Temni. And we'll be having more of these gentlemen sometime in September. So look forward to that. We had engineering aspects from Dr. Vasant Matsagar, as well as Dr. Pujari, and how they relate to insurance. That was a very good combination that they did. And of course, Mr. Pranav Patel zeroed in on the insurance aspects and how they all can fit in to the bill. We must also thank Mr. Abhishek Pal for listing out all the codes which can be readily accessed by anybody from the CAI website and also the BIS website. He's given you the references and they can all be known from there. And if there is any question you still would like to be answered, that can be referred to BIS directly to Mr. Abhishek Pal. I must, of course, thank Dr. Subbarao for moderating this event wonderfully. Unfortunately, our president, Dr. Pradhan, had to go away for a ministerial meeting and he left this job of thanking everyone to me. So once again, I thank everyone and we will draw this session to a close. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you all. Thank you all. Good day. Good day. Good day.
If you want, you can jump. You're audible.
Thank you.
We want to announce about the presentations available on the website and YouTube.
But emails will go.
Okay.
Okay, should we close?